That's gonna happen anyways.
Yeah.
So we always look at it as we're not exactly like holding on to these people, like trying to like cage them, but like,
there must be some people within your company that you know, like these people are key for us. How do we keep them?
There are. So there's usually senior executives, people that, you know, obviously are very core fixtures of your company, but they have enough responsibility that the loyalty is built into, obviously, the empire they're building within your empire. But like we know that with certain very high potential engineers, we're not keeping them. They're like rentals, right? We're renting them for a couple of years, right? And so it's unfortunate, but actually it's not, because when you think about it, you're just suffocating them when they're wanting to obviously go on and try other things. And so it's you have to, as a modern employer, expect these types of things, and then build that into your, you know, everything from your hiring model. Like we always hire a 20% extra for certain teams to expect certain turnover. I mean, there's certain things that you build into your model that is more, again, it's designed for high speed, fast paced tech industry talent.
We talk about coding as a sexy career to get into. The announcement today as well is good news. Do you see in a number of years that there could be a potential oversupply of talented people? I know right now we hear, you know, I talk about it on the radio on a daily basis, that there is a talent pool. You can add to the talent pool. There's jobs here for you if you're willing to do these jobs. We saw this in the past 10, 15 years with nurses, when there's now an oversupply of nurses in British Columbia. Do you think we'll ever get to a point where there's an oversupply of talented people for the tech industry?
I think time will tell. I mean, everything's market, so you know, supply and demand, we'll see how they even out. But I think there will, I will go out on a limb and say there probably will, depending on how much of a ambitious, upstarting type individuals are in that pool of people that got trained. And so that's why I think it's cool to have the vocational knowledge around coding, but I think there's going to be an attitude component and a cultural component around people who feel like they can actually start it too, or start their own companies, because maybe you don't get hired by like a Microsoft or a Google, but then you create your own, right? So I think if those people have that potential, or it's built into how they're learning, then there will be no necessary sort of oversupply if you want to create your own job in the first place, right?
Was that how you started Kiip? Were you hoping that you would eventually work for one of these companies, but thought, bugger it, I'll just start my own thing?
Well, again, like with every sort of university educated, you know, you kind of go out there like, I want to work for, you know, like a big company, and like, you know, I was applying for brand management jobs since I studied marketing and solder. So I applied for brand management jobs at like Unilever, and Colgate never called me back. So I was like, oh shit, that's not gonna work. So I'm gonna use my nerd tendencies and see if I can go somewhere in the world that seems to understand me. Silicon Valley was one of those places. So I got a job at Dig, but then Dig laid me off 6 months later, so I had no job. So really out of necessity as well, I was like, maybe I should start something. And that was when the seed funding boom was starting again, was actually in 2010. So I was fortunate enough to be a part of that, and that's when I got my first round of funding. And that obviously was the kickoff to me deciding that being the thing that I would do.
You've been doing this from a very early age. You went to university when you were 14. Do you find younger people now are coming to you looking for a mentor?
Yes, and then I always try to tell them that you want to look for a mentor that's always 6 months ahead of you, right? So I think too often we are very tempted to look for the ones that, you know, we feel like are like maybe miles ahead and are very more inspirational rather than sort of directly relevant. And my advice is, you know, always try to find someone 6 months ahead, because these are the people that are basically going to help you cheat, because they've done everything but 6 months before you, and in a time frame that's relevant to you, right? Because, you know, the markets change very quickly, and as long as you're within a current cycle and they've done it in that cycle, they, you know, simple things like, oh, I'm trying to come up with like a proper set of interview question tests for a data scientist. Asking someone for that from 2 years ago is not the same as now. And then we can just, and usually I can just ask someone 6 months ahead of me and just pass me those relevant questions.
So the mentorship is evolving as it goes.
Absolutely,
right.
Yeah.
Who do you have as mentors when it comes to things that you want to do?
Well, I have a few folks that are in the different industries that touch our business. So I have mentors in advertising and media. I have mentors in mobile apps and SDKs and analytics. And I have mentors in the overall sort of startup, sort of raising money and working with investors in that sort of arena. So for me, it was really more designing a group of people that I knew, like sort of like the board of directors of like your Me Inc., right? So it's not just for your company, right? So this is the other piece of advice is, you know, and again, take it with a grain of salt. You will always have advisors to your company, investors to your company, but they're looking out for the company's best interests. you want to have people who are also looking out for your best interests as well. So sometimes people forget that, and especially the younger, early stage founders will think of them as one and the same, and it truly is in the beginning. Don't get me wrong, but later on, your company becomes an animal of its own, and then you become an entity, and so you have to make sure you manage between the two.
One of the things you mentioned is attitude is part of the component here. Not only is the talent for what you do part of that, but attitude as well. And I think that is the true statement for most industries. What sort of attitude are you looking for? If someone's got those skills, what are the attitude components that you want to bring into your culture?
So there's always this dynamic that we've noticed in Silicon Valley where you'll come in usually from out of state, right? So from Michigan or from Massachusetts or whatever. You end up in San Francisco and you get presented your first $140,000 offer and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And you go in there and you start working and and then all of a sudden you get presented with your first $180,000 offer within like 6 months. I'm not even kidding, this is what happens. Right. And then your head becomes really big. And now you think that you're the king of the world, right? So I think what happens is we try to find the engineers that have not necessarily gotten hit with that second offer.
You're looking for people who can keep their egos in check.
Correct. And the reason why is because then they're not there to genuinely create. They're there because it's a stepping stone. We want the creators. We want those who are there to get their hands dirty. They want to actually create things, build things. That building mentality and the management mentality comes when you have this, by the way, and everyone thinks management is glamorous, but I always try to, even in my personal time, one-on-one with some of these engineers, I try to tell them, I'm like, if you're truly talented at building and you want to continue building, management will completely stifle your ability to do that because now you're spending your time managing people. Yeah. As sexy as that sounds, that's not what you actually necessarily want.
So how do you use your time management to run your company but also create for it as well?
That's very tough even for me. I mean, for me, I've accepted that my co-founders are the creators. They're very, very good at it. I mean, for a while, I mentioned I learned how to design when I was younger. I thought I was decent at design, and then I met my co-founders, and they're like, boom, right? So I was like, okay, you guys take that on. My version of creation is more in partnerships, business development, sales, opening doors. Those are the things I ended up taking on. So making those divisions clear was very helpful early on.
What are some challenges looking for talent going ahead, do you think?
In general, or for us?
Just in general. You know, we've discussed, where the talent's coming from, what, our government here attempting to do something they could have done it a couple of years earlier. Yeah. But, going forward, is the talent going to come from provincial governments and state governments saying, hey, let's put these sort of tools in, or is there even more tools they can be adding to make sure that when that talent pool gets of age, and look, that age can be at any age now, that you're going to be able to find the right people?
Well, I think what I encourage a lot of my fellow founders is to invest heavily in your internal training, because you're not going to get prepackaged talent that's perfect and just fits right in, right? You're going to find people who have a lot of potential that you need to build and help grow. And by the way, that is the big selling point as well. They want to grow within your company, because if they're not learning, if they're not taking on challenges that help them expand, they're not going to end up, So I think there's going to be companies that underinvest in that, and that will be the big challenge for them, is how do they get back on track in figuring out how to actually create programs that are designed for learning. Because these guys are not there to just make money anymore. They're there to learn, or these guys and gals, sorry, they're there to learn as much as they can and to expand their horizons.
In my industry, we are currently going through a change where a lot of the older guys and girls are sort of moving on. They're bringing in younger talent. Do you find that your industry has lifers? People that they get a job that they like, they're really good at it, and they just stick around because they love it.
Every industry has lifers, and I actually do agree that in many stages of a startup, you have different composition of talent. So in the early days, you want a lot of generalists, intrapreneurs, a lot of self-starters, folks that actually eventually want to be entrepreneurs and want to try everything, because you want essentially a Jack or a Jill of all trades, right? So that's in the early stage. For us, because we're 5 years in, later on, you need to have, to a certain extent, a set of lifers that are very much so, very specialized, very understanding of how to be extremely efficient with their particular area of their job. More specifically in operations, in administrative stuff like finance, accounting, things.
I would imagine having a lifer around too would also...
They're like the company historian.
Company historian, a company mum, if you will, but also someone that sort of is the pinnacle of what your company culture is about too.
Yes, and
then, they know and understand it from day
And it's
one.
their stage of life, and when I've noticed this, there's different priorities depending on the stage of life that they're in. If they have a family, if they have different priorities, this is very different. So that's why I think in the way that you look at folks going through college and they have just the possibilities are endless. They can go anywhere in the world. They have no baggage. They can just do whatever they want. There's a very different mentality. And that's why we created programs to help facilitate that, and then other programs to help people who want to stay in their field to specialize there as well.
We see a lot of businesses either are starting here in BC or moving here. You're from here but based in San Francisco. Do you ever see yourself being based back in BC at any stage?
Well, now that everything's 40% off, I'm heavily considering it.
Property prices are still quite high, though.
Yeah, property, but that's still 40% off. So now it's like sort of normal, not really. It'll never be.
I don't know. It confuses me on a daily basis.
Exactly.
So you don't know?
We don't know. We actually have a few employees here, but for us, it's looking at, again, if it's. I'm not doing it just because everyone else is doing it. It's more, is there a true source of talent that's aligned and wants to actually tackle the challenges we're tackling? And the thing is, again, culturally and exposure, right? So the funny thing is, a good chunk of our team is in New York, and the reason is because us being in the advertising and media business, the people who understand or might come from families even or have seen their parents do jobs in advertising will understand that world. But to try to find advertising talent in the West Coast is very tough unless
you're going to where the talent is.
Correct, in some ways, yeah. And also where the clients are and where we're going to end up servicing them.
Right, excellent. Brian Wong, everybody, from Kiip. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you both.